Greetings, saludos everyone. On behalf of the National Behavioral Health Association and the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center, we welcome you to our first virtual learning session titled, The Reality of Legal Marijuana and Hispanic Latino Youth, Myths, Truths, Consequences, and Options. My name is Dr. Michelle Zelaya, and the project coordinator for the National Hispanic and Latino Technology Transfer Center. I will be your host for today's session. Before I introduce you to the presenters, here are some brief instructions about today's presentation. This session will be recorded and archived for future playback, and it will be closed captioned in Spanish and eventually also in Portuguese. The lines will be mute throughout the presentation. When we get to the QA portion of the session, you will have an opportunity to ask questions by typing your question into the QA box, and I will present your questions to our speakers. Although we are not providing continuing education credit for this event, we plan to do so for future events. For this virtual session, we can offer you an electronic certificate of attendance with 1.5-hour credit upon request when you complete the evaluation. So let's begin. The National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center is housed at the National Latino Behavioral Health Association, NALBA. NALBA is a nonprofit organization. NALBA was established to fill a need for a unified national voice for Latino population in the behavioral health arena and to bring attention to the great disparities that exist in areas of access, utilization, practice-based research, and effectively trained personnel. Next slide, please. The National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center is part of the PTTC network, which is an international and multidisciplinary resource for professionals in the prevention field. Established in 1993 by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, SAMHSA. The National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center has a national focus for Hispanic and Latino communities and the workforce to provide service to these communities. Next slide, please. The PTTC is staffed by Dr. Pierluigi Mancini, our project director, Ms. Priscilla Yamasi, Executive Administrative Assistant, and myself, Dr. Michelle Zelaya, project coordinator. Next slide, please. Also, we'll be asking you to fill up a brief evaluation at the end of this webinar. This evaluation survey is important to the work we do, and provide us with the opportunity to improve our training efforts and to secure fundings to continue our work. Please take a moment to complete this evaluation. Next slide, please. Now, please allow me to introduce our speakers and national prevention champions, Ms. Henny Lasley, Dr. Ruben Baylor, Mr. Ray Lozano, and our moderator, Yvette Torres. Let's start with Ms. Henny Lasley. Ms. Lasley is the Executive Director and co-founder of Smart Colorado. Smart Colorado is the only citizen-led, nonprofit, no-partisan organization focused exclusively on protecting the public health and safety of Colorado youth as marijuana is commercialized and increasingly available. Smart Colorado provides information to policymakers, parents, adults, educators, youth-serving organizations, and the media about the impacts of commercialized marijuana. Now, let's continue with Dr. Ruben Baylor. Dr. Ruben Baylor received his PhD in microbiology and molecular biology from the University of Miami in 1993. In October 2004, he joined the Science Policy Branch in the Office of Science and Policy and Communication at the National Institute of Drug Abuse as a health scientist. His early publications have focused on temporal regulations of gene expression of the brain clock. Since joining NIDA, he has written a lecture about the neurobiology of drug abuse and addictions. And we also have Mr. Ray Lozano. He is a prevention specialist, a unique national speaker. His career started out in the Teen Challenge Ministry Institute, where he saw firsthand the devastation of drug use in young adults. And last but not least, we have our wonderful moderator, Ms. Yvette Torres. She is an special expert consultant in the addiction field since January 2018. She is the former associate director for Consumer Affairs and the Federal Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, CSAT, and Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, SANSA. Mr. Henny, Dr. Baylor, Mr. Lozano, and Yvette, welcome. It is an honor to have each of you this afternoon in our virtual learning session. So, welcome again. Thank you. And Yvette, let's begin our conversation.
Well, let's do that. Good day, everyone. I just want to remind you what we're talking about here today. And we're dealing with the reality of legal marijuana and Hispanic and Latino youth, myths, truth, consequences, and options. And today we're going to go into 3 different sections of this video learning community session. The first section, we're going to talk about what the current facts about marijuana are according to the research. Then we'll spend some time talking about how the prevention community has addressed the challenges faced by the adoption of Amendment 64, legalizing recreational marijuana in Colorado. And we're using Colorado because they really have been a lead state in the legalization of medical marijuana as well as recreational. And they are beginning to see what some of the consequences are for moving in that direction. Our third section today, we're going to talk about how do we increase the skill set of practitioners and parents to address the challenges posed by medical and recreational marijuana legalization efforts in their states. So I am delighted to be here today. Thank you to NELBA, the National Latino Behavioral Health Association, for putting, and all of their staff, Dr. Mancini, Dolka, and everyone else, and Fred, for putting all of this together. Dr. Baylor, let's start with you. How does marijuana affect the brain, and are there specific developmental dangers when used by children and youth?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and welcome everyone. I think that this question is quite complex, so I think that the best way to approach the question is by using an analogy. I think that one of the best ways of thinking about the brain is thinking of the brain as a marketplace. And within the brain, different regions, different functions use different currencies. There are currencies that we call them dopamine, glutamate, cannabinoids. Different currencies have different functions in different regions. And you can imagine, like in any marketplace, when you introduce fake money, fake currency, the value of different functions become disrupted or corrupted. So this is true for any drug that can hijack or that can flood the different currency markets with this fake money. Marijuana contains a particular fake type of molecule that hijacks or mimics a cannabinoid in the brain. And it can hijack and disrupt all the functions, the normal functions that cannabinoids typically play in the brain. One of the functions that we are more concerned about and worry about is the function of cannabinoids, this very specific type of currency, in the function of brain development during the time from pre-adolescence, adolescence, and young adulthood. During this time, the brain is being programmed. And by introducing this fake currency that we call cannabinoid or THC, that hijacks the cannabinoids, then we can perturb that very carefully choreographed process of brain development.
And given the fact of the danger of having that brain hijacked, what developmental issues come into play, Dr. Baylor, as kids are exposed to it?
Well, there are two sets of major consequences, some for which we have association data. Research shows, for example, that chronic use of marijuana or heavy use of marijuana is associated, not necessarily in a causal way, it's associated with mental illness like anxiety or chronic stress or panic attacks, that is psychosis. These are all association studies. But we also know that another consequence of chronic marijuana use could be addiction. Marijuana is an addictive drug. But what I'm more worried about during the developmental phases, beyond this possibility of mental illness and addiction, which can occur later on in life, is the direct impact that the chronic or regular use of marijuana has on young people in terms of impacting their motivation, their memory, their learning capacity, and in general, their academic performance. This is very serious consequence because at this stage in life, you want to be invested fully in your academic performance because that's the main investment that you do for the rest of your life. And any disruption of that very important process can lead to major consequences that are long lasting.
Very good. Dr. Baylor, and I want to stop here and ask Henny and Ray if they have anything to add on these first two questions. Not hearing from them?
No, go ahead, Henny, if you want.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I'm honored to be with all of you. I think the one thing that I just would add to that is in Colorado, we have found that there is an association with a failure to graduate from high school. So I think it's important to know that, and just to echo what Dr. Baylor has said.
Excellent, thank you. Ray?
And I would agree with Dr. Baylor. For youth, it's such a critical time and the brain is figuring out how it's going to work. And like he said, when you introduce that fake currency, the brain starts to use that. And it's so critical at the beginning to get it right. So later on in life, you're thinking more clearly and straight. But when you introduce marijuana at the beginning, it's really difficult.
And let me go back. Dr. Baylor, let's talk about, you talked about anxiety attacks. You talked about secondary effects beyond the developmental factors. Can you explain that to the practitioners and the folks that are here listening today? How does that manifest itself? What should they tell parents to be on the lookout for?
Well, the parents are the first line of defense. They know their kids the best. So any change in hygiene protocols or sleep disturbances or academic performance of a deviant behavior broadly defined or affiliation with peers that are not the typical peers, anything that goes beyond what those kids have been typically normally doing in their lives is a red flag that the parents should be very carefully, very attuned to. Their antennae should be perked up constantly because nowadays they are exposed to all this information and all these stimuli that are very, very attractive, and kids will turn naturally to gravitate towards these stimuli and peers, and it's an extremely dangerous time, and parents need to be aware of any change, even if it looks like a minor change, in those things particularly: friends, hygiene, academic performance, sleep, and eating habits.
Sleep patterns. Very good. I want to shift now a little bit and talk about the states are facing pressure from the medicinal marijuana side, obviously, and then it evolves into recreational. And we really do need to identify, Dr. Baylor, what does current, if anything, does current research tell us about marijuana's medicinal benefits versus its risks?
I think it's very important to preface this segment by saying that the advocates for medicinal marijuana have really taken advantage of a lot of confusion in the field. We have cannabis, we have endocannabinoids, which is the natural currency, we have phytocannabinoids, which are the cannabinoids in the plant. So all these terms are have been very useful for the advocates to introduce and take advantage of that confusion. So we need to make clear of this confusion that they have been taking advantage of. Now, in terms of medicinal marijuana, what we do have, science does know that there are active ingredients in the plant, in the cannabis sativa, like THC and CBD, which now have a limited number of approved indications for therapeutic indications, like for nausea, for example, associated with the chemotherapy treatment, or for wasting syndrome in AIDS. We have CBD that now has been recently approved for rare forms of epilepsy in kids. But that's about it. That's the extent of the range of approved medications, therapeutic indications for cannabis-based active ingredients. When we move from those pure components, THC and CBD, that can be extracted from the plant or synthesized in a lab, to the concept of medicinal marijuana, now we enter into the oxymoron field, an oxymoron realm. There is no such thing as medicinal marijuana. Why? Because there is no medicine that contains thousands of compounds, most of which have been not characterized. There is no real way a clinical trial can be conducted in a rigorous way to ascertain the adverse effect for all the populations that we need to ascertain before we can release such a product in the market. So insofar medicinal marijuana concerns, we will not have such a thing. That will continue to be an oxymoron unless we can carry out the rigorous clinical trials on standardized preparations of marijuana extracted or botanical compounds that are required to really ascertain the therapeutic index, how beneficial for specific populations, and what are the known adverse effects for those populations.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do we have any current statistics, Dr. Baylor, on pointing to increased marijuana use as a result of legalization efforts by Latino youth in specifically, but more broadly by all youth?
Well, I think Henny may have more information coming from a state where they are doing this experiment. There are limited number of studies, one coming from Colorado that I'm aware of, that looked at these trends before and after the decriminalization in Colorado. And at least by the standard of that paper, which was published in 2015, which I can share with you later on, it seems clear that with the decriminalization of marijuana, at least in Colorado, during those critical years, there had been an increase that really backed the trend from the rest of the country. There was an increase in use among youth, and there was a decrease in the perception of risk. So these are worrying trends, the mirror image trends that we don't want to see among youth, the reduction in perception of risk and the increased prevalence, that may be the harbinger of worse things coming also to fruition in other states. That seems to be the case. Now, it's still premature, I should say, from a research point of view. We don't have all that much data. The trends are relatively early, and what we are doing right now is an experiment of epic proportions in different labs, in different states right now. And the devil is in the details. We need to wait for more data to come in, but the early data that I'm seeing now does not bode well for the future of our youth health.
Well, that's a given. Tell us a little bit what is NIDA looking at in this area? Are there any studies undergoing now that we can look to in the future?
Absolutely. We are looking at, but there are two major things that I'd like to mention now. There is a very robust science policy portfolio that is analyzing these different laboratory experiments in different states. And the results of that, they will have to wait, obviously. It's still early on in the process. And then we have this ABCD study, which is a longitudinal study of more than 11,000 kids recruited at the age of 9. And these kids will be followed for 10 years. And we will know with much better precision and accuracy than we've ever had before, really what is the trajectory of early use of marijuana and other drugs, and how these behaviors interact with sleep, with eating habits, with different cultural norms. So this is going to be really an experiment of epic proportions, a longitudinal study that I would encourage everybody to stay tuned, go to the ABCD study in the NIDA website and learn about it, because it's going to be
Excellent.
A transformational study.
Excellent. And that study will be completed when?
Well, it's about 9-10 years from now.
Okay.
But in the meantime, there are papers already coming out.
Those are the challenges that we face in long-term studies, I guess. For the entire panel, I want to say, does marijuana use lead to other drug use? Is it a gateway drug?
I'm going to say definitely yes. And when parents ask me about that, I tell them they're being introduced to a different element, especially when it comes to marijuana. And what I found with kids is kids will hang out with a certain group of peers and they'll smoke, and then somebody will get introduced to the group that is farther along, maybe adding something to marijuana or doing a different type of drug, and that adds a new element to that group, and kids follow along with that. That's more not on a clinical level, but more on a personal level, because kids are being introduced to that element from friends.
Hetty, do you have anything to add?
Most of my information at this point really would be anecdotal. I will say that as we get further into our discussion, one of the things that we'll talk about is the various concentrated forms of marijuana, which many in our state refer to as the crack of marijuana, because it is so potent that it's a different type of high than what many of us might have really related to.
Very good. Let's move on now to our second area that we were going to be looking at here, looking at the Colorado studies and legislation and policy. Hetty, I need for you to please tell our audience what really has transpired in Colorado since the advent of the 2012 passage of Amendment 64, which legalized recreational use in that state.
Sure. And again, please, thank you so much again for having me today. A few highlights that I'd like to bring to the audience's attention is that what we've really done in Colorado is mass commercialization of adult use marijuana. I tend to use the term adult use versus recreation because we live in a beautiful state where one can ski and hike and do yoga, as opposed to and phrasing drug use as being for recreation. We have currently in our state over 500 what we call dispensaries, which both sell both medical and adult use marijuana. This might be a good time to put that slide up. And as you can see, it outnumbers our McDonald's and Starbucks because our state regulations and legislators decided not to put any types of license caps. So it's pretty much a free-for-all. If you qualify, you can open a dispensary in our state, with the exception that local municipalities do have the right to opt out of commercialization, and that was part of our amendment. The other thing that's really high on our list to monitor is the fact that we have no limits on the ways that THC can be dispensed, both as a method of intake, a product type, or the potency of marijuana. And as a result, and as we've watched and discussed earlier, the perception of harm around using marijuana has continued to decline in our state. From a social norming standpoint, 92% of our high schoolers believe that their peers are using marijuana, when in fact, 1 out of 5 kids in our state use marijuana. So we have quite a disconnect there. And then with the explosion of vaping in our state, Colorado is ranked first in the United States. Yay us! Don't be false or anything. And research has shown that kids that vape often, first of all, don't know what's in that vaporizer, but secondly, are 5 times more likely to use marijuana, either through a vape pen or other forms. And then finally, as we have been at this now for 5 years, 2020 presents some additional commercialization. We will have marijuana delivery. We will have social consumption allowed outside of your own private space. And recently our legislation changed to allow for big money to come in and invest in the future of this highly profitable industry.
That's amazing. Well, tell us a little bit about Smart Colorado and how it was founded.
Sure. So after the passage of Amendment 64, which was in 2012, the governor at the time, Governor John Hickenlooper, formed a task force to put the regulations in place, since we did not have a roadmap on the commercialization of recreational or adult use marijuana. It was designed roughly over the medical or medicinal path, but again, there were a lot of abuses in that system. As the governor's task force was formed, we recognized and became very concerned when the task force ranked the priority of protecting kids. And kids came up 9 out of 9, ninth on the list, in other words, last. And unfortunately, the parents that were sitting in the room were exasperated and deeply concerned. Our original team has 13 children between us, and they kind of picked on the wrong. We immediately formed after, because the recommendations were going to go back to our state legislature. And so we formed, and we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We do not take any marijuana tax cash money from the state derived from the sale.
Very good.
Really, we're founded by everyday citizens, and we're supported by everyday Coloradans and local foundations. And many of our supporters actually will say, we voted for Amendment 64, but appreciate that you bring a voice for our kids and youth to the table when it's time to make decisions around the marijuana landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Baylor, as NIDA looks at policy, and I don't know if you'd be able to answer this question or not, but have you seen other states really develop groups somewhat like Smart Colorado to deal with policy issues in the prevention side?
I am not personally aware of any such movement. I wouldn't be surprised, but probably Henny knows if there are colleagues in other states that are in initiatives similar to that. I bet they do.
Okay, thank you. Henny?
Yeah, as far as we know, we are it.
Really?
And a lot of it is because, again, many people are either very for marijuana or very against marijuana. And we had to rise up as almost an island and say, you know what, we have been dealt this hand. And quite honestly, many prevention folks walked away from the conversation, law enforcement as well, because sometimes a strategy is you hope something will blow up if you want it to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We respect that very much, but again, the impact on our kids was it was too great for us to not have that voice.
Absolutely.
Right.
Go ahead, Ray.
As I travel around the country, I see other organizations that are doing work, but not to the level that Henny and her organization is. I think about in Oregon, there's SODA, Southern Oregon Drug Awareness. Back east, there's organizations, but they're not as focused and as well educated as what Henny's doing. So I believe several of them even go to her website and gather information from her. But yeah, they're not at the same level that she's at.
Okay. Henny, can you tell us about what policy Smart Colorado has been able to advocate for, and what policies have been adopted that help in this regard?
Sure. One of the first was that as edibles, which is a definition basically that THC is infused in food products, including sodas, candies, baked goods, pasta sauces. Again, no limits on what it can go in. One thing that we became very concerned about as we saw increases in admissions to hospitals and poison control calls went up dramatically. We went to the legislature and said, you know, if someone's going to eat something, they need to know whether or not THC is present. And so We came up with the first edible marking, so that if a person was faced, say, at a party where there was candy in a bowl, there was a marking so they could identify whether or not THC was present. We were successful in that. I will say that the marijuana industry fought the next legislative session to try to repeal that. We now are seeing other states also follow that best practice. Also identifying and having folks educated around potency is critical. We fought very hard for potency limits to be disclosed on marijuana products, because we believe that consumers and parents need to know, as does if someone comes into the emergency department, what potent marijuana form they perhaps have ingested. Child-resistant packaging. We've supported legislation that no edible should resemble a human, an animal, or a fruit. We support funding for school-based behavioral health specialists, boots on the ground for kids across the state that might not only be dealing with marijuana issues themselves, but also marijuana use in the home, which is something that many have not really been prepared for. Now that it's legal, some of the stigma is off. We work on limiting the number of plants that can be grown in a home, limited hours of dispensary operations, distance requirements from where kids are in terms of recreational centers, daycares, schools, pools, things of that nature. And one of the things that we're most proud of is this last legislative session we have, which differentiates marijuana from alcohol, is a dispensary now will have to put a notice up around the risks for a pregnant or breastfeeding woman. And that's something not even present in liquor stores. So we're proud of that. So those were some of our policy wins, but they are far and few between, I'll be honest, because we must keep in mind that for every one Smart Colorado, we had over 75 registered lobbyists for protections for a very powerful industry. So the realities can be quite daunting, but don't give up, because it's worth it.
Yeah, I was particularly struck during one of our practice sessions, Henny, when you mentioned that there's even a consideration now to have a special section in restaurants be designated for those who wish to participate in recreational marijuana. And I found that to be quite contrary to the trend of the tobacco industry, which was to get rid of any secondhand smoke contamination for non-participating parties.
Yes, I'll just add that during the session, the legislative session, this came up and actually held the Clean Indoor Air Act now allows for vaping to be exempted, or vaping is now exempted out of included in the Clean Indoor Air Act. However, for social consumption, the industry held this up until vaping THC was given a pass in a establishment that would allow for marijuana consumption. So we fight this because of the continued normalization and believe that will follow the tracks of alcohol and tobacco. So we try to use those as examples of how to make legislators really think about good policy.
Yeah. Henny, I know that, does anyone else want to add anything, Ray or Dr. Baylor? No. Okay, thank you. Henny, talk to me or us about the whole issue of your public education efforts. I was on your website. I saw that you have quite a number of public education efforts, and can you talk to us about their efficacy? Have they gravitated to be played, and have they had an impact?
Sure. We believe that we have a responsibility to show what's really happening in our state. And if any of you after the presentation want to Google, can you spot the pot? It'll immediately pull up our billboard that was used to try to advocate for policy change around edible markings. We were very concerned that candy and THC were going hand in hand. And again, because there's no limits on what products it can go into, it did at least allow us to have a teaching tool around edibles. And just so you know, it was a $5,000 investment to put that billboard up, and the statistics of how much media coverage it got, we had calls from all over the world, quite honestly, about that, because it was right after legalization. We have other examples on our website, asking questions. You know, is today's marijuana a hard drug? And what that policy change led to was that marijuana now has to be separated in a dispensary based on potency over 75%. A couple of other ones that we worked on is can ultra potent pot kill? And we put some examples of where we feel like marijuana contributed to the death of an individual. Again, we were working to try to limit potency in our state because we don't think everything should be available. And then also to identify that today's marijuana is much different than the marijuana from days gone by. As the second largest city in our state, Colorado Springs, was working to consider adult use dispensaries. So those are just 4 examples, and you can find those on our social media and also on our website, which we'll give those later in the presentation.
As you were talking just now, I had a question in the previous panel that I didn't get to ask, which is, I went on the NIDA website and they had a whole section on dabbing. Does anybody want to get into that? Because I don't think that an awful lot of people know what that current trend is.
I'll be happy to. And actually on our YouTube channel, we have a video that contains exactly what that looks like. Dabbing is the taking of a very small portion of concentrated product in the form of a wax that gets heated up by a heat source. Oftentimes it's a butane torch. It melts it and then becomes a vapor and is ingested in through what looks like it's called a dab rig, which is kind of a modified pipe. And I have heard many adults say that it's put individuals that are frequent dab users on their tails for up to 6 to 7 hours. Very potent high, very quick, very potent high.
Everywhere I go across the United States, kids are aware of this. And we'll talk about marijuana and the potency. We'll talk about edibles. And then I'll ask in large group presentations, how many of you are familiar with dabbing? And I've yet to find any group in the United States where kids aren't familiar with this. So it's not, just a Colorado thing. It's now become a whole United States thing. And like Henny said, the potency is so high with that.
Well, I'm going to ask this last question of this section for all the panelists. So based on your current work, your experience, and the results that you've seen of your efforts, what key recommendations would you give to prevention specialists, to parents, to other care providers, civic leaders, about what they should be doing right now to address the impact of legalization efforts in their states?
So I would say that the most important thing is be educated and be informed. You have an example, you have a state that is now maturing in this marketplace. So be educated and be informed, and know that parent and trusted adult voices truly do matter. I would tell you that we know from some of our protective factors that prioritizing protecting kids really does pay off, because we know that kids that know that their parents think underage use is wrong are 72% less likely to use marijuana during those formative years. And we really push the message, delay, delay, delay. Because while that brain is forming, these are those years that we really need kids to stay really focused on school and not being railed by marijuana use.
And I think that's imperative. I'll go to you, Ray, in 1 second. I think that's imperative, because I think even when I was at SAMHSA, we were seeing, even in elementary school, the later years of elementary school, there were kids already experimenting. So it's amazing what they can do now with this higher availability. Go ahead, Ray, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, not a problem. One of the things that both Henny and Dr. Baylor talked about were parents and, you know, they're being the front line. And so I would say on the question that you asked is empowering parents. You never know, you'll hit that one parent that will start a coalition, that will start a movement just because of the passion that they have. And if you look at all these different movements that are taking place, it always starts with the passion. And when you have a parent that's lost a son or a daughter to something that's marijuana related, they want to make a difference. So one of the things I would say to your question is empowering parents and giving them an opportunity to learn and to go out and to affect other parents.
And just a quick word here. I think that what Henny said is really the key about education, but I would even step back at least one step a little bit, and the message that to empower the parents really has to be one of universal prevention. There is nothing specific or particularly interesting in marijuana. The parents and the kids need to understand why a developing brain needs to be clean of any drug, legal or illegal, marijuana, high concentration or low concentration, tobacco or alcohol, it doesn't matter. This brain is being programmed and you want to keep all that fake currency out of the equation. So the message needs to be why you shouldn't be exposing that brain to anything toxic. It's not just don't do this or don't do that, because these toxic influences are many out there and they keep evolving. There is a new one almost every week. So the message we have to step back and really empower the parents to explain the kids, to learn together with the kids from Henny's website or our website, why is it that they should be keep their brains clean of any drug of abuse.
And Ray, I'll come back to you during the next panel because I want to be able to tell our listening audience how to make that approach to parents, guide the parents through that process. Henny, I want to ask you, given what has been said just now, do you work with the school systems in Colorado and have they asked for even help in this regard?
Yes, we do. We do a lot of parent presentations to PTAs, and we work closely with the Colorado Department of Education to provide current information as it comes available through the behavioral health specialists that are in the schools. And one of the resources that I've listed at the end of the presentation is called the Marijuana Education Resource Bank, which has just been posted by the Colorado Department of Education. Again, we are very far out in front of our skis from a lot of the current research. So what we do is just try to make sure individuals know what's on the market, know what products are available so that kids can be better protected. And one of the things that comes up a lot is whether or not the first conversation oftentimes is what happens if I smoke marijuana, or what happens if I smoked it as a child, or I used it as an adult. And what we've found to be a very effective tool is to say, you know what, we're not really talking about grown-ups. We're not really talking about what I might have done as a kid. What I'm talking about is the here and the now, and there's no judgment. And I think, Dr. Baylor, your point is very well taken, that why is so important, not no. And, but to be able to talk about it, to level the playing field, to focus on that we're talking about the impact to adolescents, really does help in our conversations with adults.
Is there a curriculum available or where at the site that you have suggested people visit?
Well, go ahead, Henny, please.
Sorry, excuse me. On the resource page at the end of our presentation, the State Health Department has different links.
Excellent, thank you. And Henny, I need for you to move forward every time you speak, because just now when you were right there, you sounded terrific. Dr. Baylor.
Yeah, just to put a plug for a new, very short video that explains precisely that why. Is the answer to that why that we were talking about before. It's a 5 or 6 minute video. that really explains that in a very, I think it's a wonderfully lay audience friendly way. You just Google NIDA brain development, and this will be the first video to come out in YouTube, NIDA brain development. We can send the link later if it's possible to the audience. But that's a very brief primer of why the developing brain should be clean of any drug of abuse.
Absolutely. Ray, any comments?
No, I agree with all of that they've said, and yeah, I don't feel like I need to add anything. That was well put.
Excellent. So let's talk about right now the whole notion of what resources. Let's continue on the whole area of resources available. But first, let's look at Ray. This question's for you. What specific set of skills are now required by prevention specialists to handle the spread of medicinal and recreational marijuana within Latino communities?
That's a great question. What I'm finding is the misinformation that youth have, and especially Hispanic youth. They will come up to me during presentations and they'll show me a little photo that says marijuana cures cancer. And so kids have this thing in their head that if they're using marijuana, it's like a preventative to cancer. And they just, read the headline. So one of the things that prevention specialists need to have is they need to know this information. They need to know the current information that's out there, what the truth about marijuana is. And like Dr. Baylor said, NIDA is one of the premier sites, I would say, with current information, and it's constantly being updated. The information is non-biased, and it says, here it is. Here's what's the problem, or, and it's not any type of judgmental information, and the research behind it is amazing. The other website is SAMHSA, SAMHSA, and they have a lot of information on their website as well. As I was developing the programs that we're running, both of those websites are two of the websites that I go to for some of the current information. There's another website out there called Get Smart About Drugs, and that's .gov, and that one's put out as well. And that one is geared a little bit more towards youth, where NIDA and SAMHSA has a little more technical information. These next two websites, I think, would be appropriate for kids to go to. And so prevention specialists would easily understand this information. So Get Smart About Drugs. And then the issue about vaping and dabs, thetruth.com is another website that has great information on there, has surveys. And so for a prevention specialist, I think knowing the current information is very, very important and critical at this time.
And Henny, we'll be having another VLC session on certification for prevention professionals. Can you talk to us? Is there a move to really take a look at that certification and perhaps influence some of the subjects and skill sets that folks may have given the advent of this new threat in the communities?
Are you directing that question towards me?
To both, Henny, and to you, Ray.
Okay. Yes, I'm aware that there is a prevention specialist program that's out there for people that are going into the field, and I see that quite a bit where people become certified, because back in the day, it was always thought that somebody who used drugs was effective in helping somebody get off drugs, but both are effective. So personally myself, I've never used, but I am very effective in the field because of the information and the knowledge that I have. And so what it is, it's important to be certified in that field to show that you've demonstrated that you have gotten the knowledge for presenting that type of information and understanding how addiction works.
Excellent. And Henny, specifically to you, do you see a need to include a skill set that deals with just the whole issue of marijuana within the certification process?
I know enough to be dangerous on the topic, but I would say that I would say yes, but it's continued to really be a challenge as to what is that magic bullet that we need for talking to kids. And that's why our approach at Smart Colorado has been to focus on informing adults in our state about what's really out there and what those impacts are, again, to really tie into the protective factors that adults that are informed and educated and care about kids are going to do a better job of keeping kids from using marijuana.
Well, I'm asking that because, of course, our aim through these sessions is really to engage individuals that are Latino and inform them and give them the tools they need to work within our communities. But also, a lot of times, our youth, our parents, our affected population are not going to be going to, if they necessarily, to a Latino practitioner. So let's talk about, Ray, right now as to how do we basically get non-Latino practitioners to increase their cultural competence to address marijuana use among Hispanic Latino communities, and what should they be aware of?
Man, you are asking some excellent questions today. And so one of the things for a non-Latino practitioner to do is, I believe, to understand the culture and the differences that there are. And in order to understand those differences, I believe that practitioner needs to be part of some type of coalition in the community, especially if there's a large Hispanic population. When I go to Texas or Arkansas or even Connecticut, I'm finding that there's these large pockets of Hispanic communities, and they kind of clump together and they do a lot of things together. So I think it would be important. And going back to something Dr. Baylor said, not just specifically about marijuana, but about prevention. So being part of a coalition to understand the culture and to understand the needs. And then on the other side of that, as a practitioner, is providing a space to develop a coalition. And so not only being part of one, but saying, you know what, we have the office space, we have the funds, and I would love to see something happen here. And I think with that two-prong approach, where they're going out and seeking information and then coming back and providing a space for that, I think that will increase the competency that they would have in working with the Hispanic community. Because I see so many organizations that develop something and say, here you go, this is for you, and it doesn't fit. And so they need to understand first, and then through that, working with the parents and the other community organizers to develop a program that would be effective for the Hispanic community.
Henny, anything to add, Dr. Baylor?
No.
I did a good job.
Yeah, just a little bit off topic. One of the things that I have found in my work is that the Hispanic speaking television and radio has been very instrumental in keeping the Hispanic community informed about Colorado's marijuana. So wherever you are in these wonderful United States, use those connections and ask them to help inform your communities about what's going on this particular subject matter.
Very good. And speaking of that, now that we've said that we don't have sufficient folks to really render services, Ray, what steps can be taken to increase the number of Hispanic Latino practitioners that are trained to address the growing threats posed by medicinal and recreational marijuana?
I believe those that are in charge, or those who want to be effective in that community, need to look for leaders. And they need to look for people that are standing up going, you know what, I want to be part of this. I want to be effective in working with kids. I want to be effective in working with my culture. I want to be effective in working with my people. So they need to look for those leaders that will naturally come out of those coalitions. And after they identify those leaders, the thing that they need to do is they need to empower those leaders. And it depends on if those leaders want to go to school or get more education or however they want to do it. But those leaders need to be empowered. And it's great when somebody is able to open doors for them or get them into places where they can be effective. I know when I was first starting out doing this, I've had doctors and I've had other people that would open doors for me. And I cannot believe how much that helped me to develop as a leader in this area. And so in turn, I think they should be doing that And then don't underestimate concerned parents. I see so many groups where, you know, a mom wants to step up or a mom wants to be effective in her community. So don't underestimate those parents, because you never know what they can do. And just like Kenny's organization was just started by some people that were concerned, and look where it is now. And yeah, and to empower them. And so those are the things that I would recommend, that they look for leaders and then they empower those leaders.
Henny, have you had any exposure to what CADCA may be doing with youth leaders in this regard?
Unfortunately, I look forward to learning more about that, but I don't really have anything to add to that conversation.
Okay, well, CADCA is the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, and they have a tremendous leadership infrastructure related to youth themselves, albeit they have to do a little more in communities of color, of course, because it's always more challenging, but they do offer quite a bit of training. So, and I'm saying this so that people actually approach CADCA, and including yourself, and see if we can begin to generate some type of synergy related to engaging youth, because I would think that one of the ways of expanding the availability of individuals that wish to go into this field is really getting them involved in peer-to-peer efforts at a young age, right, Ray?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Well,
without a doubt, that is so true.
CADCA is already very active in that space. They have the Youth Leadership Forum, which is a sub-chapter within the big CADCA convention. And I'll be doing a training, a metacognition training next year in February, I believe it is, with that Youth Leadership Forum. And it's a great space where they create these ambassadors, these very militant youth that go back to their communities, and they disseminate this very empowering information, really.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a very well-funded, well-oiled organization that really has excelled tremendously in the field of youth engagement and prevention as
Right.
well.
One of the things I would add to the CADCA is just attending their events and the cross-pollination that takes place with information. And I've seen organizations that go there and they go, oh, I'm not alone. There's other people that are doing this. And it's very empowering to see that. And it strengthens those organizations when you can connect, you know, either in your state or across the state with other people that are doing the same type of work.
Absolutely. Ray, as you travel the country, what types of concerns have Latino parents have brought to you related to marijuana, both legal and medicinal, or marijuana in general?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that question. You know, I've had moms come up to me or dads come up to me and they're actually crying, you know, because of some stuff that they're seeing with their kids. And going back to one of the things that Dr. Baylor talked about, I let parents know that they have an alarm inside them and that they need to pay attention to that alarm. So if they see their child, exactly what Dr. Baylor said, you know, that there's changes that are taking place, don't ignore that alarm. The concerns that they bring to me quite often are hands-on concerns about work ethic and drive. And so parents are like, you know, my son's smoking marijuana and he doesn't want to go out and do these things. He doesn't want to work. He doesn't want to be part of, you know, what dad's doing. And I see that quite a bit. And they're concerned about the drive. My son used to play sports. He was great in soccer. Now he started smoking weed and he's not interested in that anymore. Why is that happening?
Yeah.
Is that going to happen on a bigger scale? So the two that I see are the work ethic and the drive. And then the other thing that I see and the concerns that parents bring to me, you know, in the Hispanic community, and I know there's other cultures like this, it's a real family-orientated type of community. You know, they have quinceañeras together, they have parties together, they attend Christmas, they attend church, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, once one of the kids starts smoking weed, they start to separate themselves from that. And that really concerns the mom and dad. Why does he not want to attend these events with us anymore? You know, his older brother still does, or his younger brother still does. Does it have to do with marijuana? And they're really concerned about that. So the big three are the work ethic, the drive, and the separation that takes place from the child and the parents.
Very good. We're going to go to last thoughts. I'm going to give you an opportunity to provide a message to our listening audience of anything that we may have missed. We could go on forever exploring this, but our time is up. So I'm going to give you each maybe 30 to 40 seconds each to, basically provide final thoughts. Dr. Baylor.
Well, just very briefly, one important thing to remember is that all the science, the vast amount of science that we have on marijuana is pretty much irrelevant. It's all done with very low potency marijuana, so don't rely on the studies that we have already. We are in a different place. And the second thing that hasn't really been mentioned, and this phenomenon of marijuana decriminalization, legalization, is not happening in a vacuum. There is an epidemic proportions really of mental illness problems with our youth, be it suicide, be it being loneliness, being this problem, internet use or video or social media. All that really is creating an environment where these deviant behaviors can really thrive, and that's a real problem that we need to also pay attention. At the same time as we pay attention to marijuana and other problematic behaviors, we need to pay attention to this, be very attuned to any underlying mental illness problem that may be popping up in our youth.
Henny.
Yes, Priscilla, could you please pull up the youth use data for me? And while she's pulling that, I wanted just to demonstrate to our audience, this is an example of a recreational product that I purchased at a dispensary about 10 minutes from where I live in the Denver metro area. It is resembles a asthma relief inhaler. This is today's marijuana. Days of smoking weed out of a baggie that looks like oregano. This is today's marijuana. This can be used in a classroom. A teacher would never know the difference. And I purchased this for $100, and there are approximately 100 what we would call servings of THC that has a 70% THC potency in them. So no today's marijuana. The next slide is about youth use survey data. I wanted just to quickly run through this because oftentimes the 7-second soundbite in the media is youth use has not gone up in Colorado. And according to our Healthy Kids Colorado survey, I think it's worth exploring this just briefly. The youth use rates may have not changed materially. It's more a question about what they're actually using. Edibles have increased 7 times over. Vaping now, according at 2017, a 3 times higher youth use rate of vaping. But the big one that we've talked a lot today about is dabbing. And the kids that self-report, 1/3 of those kids are dabbing on a daily basis or have used in the last 30 days. So remember when I talk about what is today's marijuana, it's this. It's not low potent weed in a baggie.
Very good. Ray, anything else to add?
I'll make it real quick. Parents have the biggest influence on kids, even though they feel like they don't. So they need to continue to talk to their kids. When the kids are little, they talk to them about not talking to strangers, playing with matches, crossing the street, and they need to continue that conversation. So having open communication with your kids is going to be very effective in putting up one of those protective factors. Very
good. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready to go into some of the questions that we've received online. Everybody is very thankful. I want to say to you, they're thanking us profusely for hosting this. And the PowerPoint presentations will be made available. That's a DOLCA concern, and she'll touch on that at the end of our session. The other question that came up is they wanted to know, Henny, how you got funding. How did you begin the organization, and what was the seminal funding source, and how did you go about to get it?
Well, besides begging on our knees, what we did was we went to everyday Coloradans via social media. We went to our friends. SMART is now made up of approximately close to 10,000 Coloradans that support our work, which gave us the opportunity to do some fundraising with luncheons, parent coffees, but also private foundations in Colorado that recognize that we played a different role than has been brought to them in the past. So we got really lucky. Oops, sorry. Sorry about that. So you have to be really resourceful and have a lot of courage. But again, I think the fact that we did not take marijuana tax cash fund put us at an advantage to be able to say, we're not taking money from the industry.
Yeah, I think that's highly important. This is a question is from Alicia Carranza to all the panelists. And it says, due to the association between marijuana use and anxiety and panic attacks, etc., do you think adolescents caught using marijuana should be referred to counseling to address potential underlying mental health issues that may be or are resulting in self-medication with marijuana? Dr. Baylor?
Well, I think that parents should intervene whenever drug use is being identified. Whether or not there is an underlying mental issue, that's something for a professional to determine. But I'd like to highlight the point that the questioner is making about self-medication. That really stems from a misunderstanding of what medical marijuana is. Again, the person that is taking marijuana for self-medication, quote unquote, is deluding himself or herself. There is no way of predicting what is going to be the interaction of a particular individual with a particular brand or strain or potency of marijuana. It's completely unpredictable. They may have benefits for that particular person, or it may make the condition much, much worse, because there is no such thing as medical marijuana approved indications. So that's something that is very important for people to understand.
Yes, I think any assistance that a parent can get for their child is important. So I think counseling is good. I think all those types of things, any way that they can help that child out, and especially going back about the self-medication, why is this child doing this? I think it's important to understand that reason.
Okay. Henny, anything to add?
I think it's also important to understand what if a family has a primary health provider, to find out what are they talking about when your child sees them, because we have found that many pediatricians have not been really brought up to speed as to what the impacts are around marijuana. So we are pushing our medical community to further engage on this topic. We also work closely with the adolescent child psychiatry professional organizations here in our state, and to really recognize and recognize that it's important to talk about this. Talking about it doesn't cause a kid to use, everything I understand. And so it's more important to be upfront about it and talk about it.
Good. We have a from Renee Weiss, two analysts, and not one for, and it says, and I have to lift with something else on my screen. My plan is funded efforts CE. Thank you. Our in Delta help presentation sources for students and parents. Would you like to share some SMART presentation with us? Thank you.
I'm sorry, Yvette, it was difficult for me to hear you, but I think you were referring to the question from Renee.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't hear it either.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Now, yes.
Yes.
Oh, this is
okay.
This is great. Renee, thank you. And thank you for the work that you do in Delta County. And thank you for acknowledging that SMART helped with making sure funding went to our rural counties. We're an open book at SMART Colorado. We get our best satisfaction out of sharing and educating, and so we're happy to share whatever we've presented today, and we have other PowerPoints that are available, and we'll even come and see you and speak to parents if that would be helpful. And I know Ray does a lot of speaking as well throughout the U.S., and I've heard him speak several years ago, so it was really fun to reconnect with Ray. And he's a great speaker and very engaging both with kids and parents.
Excellent. Dr. Baylor, there was one question earlier by one of our folks here on synthetic marijuana. Do you want to get into a little bit of explaining, if you can, about synthetic marijuana, what its components may be, and its harm?
Well, there is no one synthetic marijuana. We're talking about compounds that are made in a lab somewhere that look like THC. That's the most common type of synthetic marijuana. Some of those have been approved by the FDA. They're called Medicinal, for example, that have been in clinical use for many years. Originally, they've been created in a lab for research purposes to understand the cannabinoid system, but they have been leaked out of the lab and now they can be abused. Recently, or in a few years ago, we've seen products like Spice or K2. Those are typically laced, or they contain some trace amounts of synthetic cannabinoids or synthetic THC. Pharmacologically, they may be very similar to a THC. The problem with some of these synthetics is that sometimes they are much more potent than THC himself, 10 or 100 times more potent. And that's where the toxicity of these synthetic cannabinoids comes in.
Very good. Anything to add, Henny?
We really focus on the legal marijuana markets because we have to, and we're often asked about other compounds around that topic, and not only that, but other drugs, other alcohol, and other illegal substances. We've really made a concerted effort at SMART to keep our eyes very focused on what's available in the legal markets.
Very good. Dolka, do you have any additional questions? I don't see any here on the screen.
Yes, thank you. I see in the chat box and also in the QA, a lot of people are asking about if the PowerPoint presentation will be available. Yes, will be after this. We can email it to you. Also, let me see. There is a question for Sofia Modiano. Is asking if there is any difference in the way Hispanic youth use marijuana versus non-Hispanic youth. If any of the panelists would like to take this question, please.
Hispanic youth.
Right. I don't see that there's a difference. I don't see that the Hispanic youth are doing one thing in particular that non-Hispanic youth are doing. So I don't see that there's a difference when it comes to use. And I just think the approach that we have to help the youth needs to be different. Approaching different cultures as opposed to Hispanic would be different. But the youth use, I would say, is the same.
Very good. One of the things that I don't think we really spoke profoundly about was protective factors, Ray. What are some of the protective factors that parents can instill in their children in order to really delay or impede the experimentation?
Right. One of the things that came out years ago that I thought was really well done, and it was called your anti-drug. What are you going to do other than drugs? What is going to be the thing that's going to go inside your brain and give you that reward? And I think it's important for parents to be able to identify that in their kids. And so with my kids, just using it on a on my level, I had to figure out what is going to be the reward for my children that would keep them from using. So my son was really into sports and my daughter was more into creative things. So I really helped them to excel in those areas. For parents, they need to figure out what is going to be their kids' anti-drug. What is the thing that they're going to want to do and protect it other than doing drugs? Is it going to be soccer? Is it going to be cooking? Is it going to be, even, one of my children did stand-up comedy. They love to perform. And we talked about the dangers of using drugs and how that will affect your brain in putting material together. And so they understood I shouldn't be using drugs because I want to be able to perform. And so finding out what that anti-drug is very important for parents in order to help their kids not use.
Very good. Well, if we don't have any more questions, Doka?
I think we have one more question from Paulina Pantoja. She said, who use more marijuana, males or females?
That would be a SAMHSA question.
Yeah.
It needs the data. National Survey on Drug Use and Health, which, by the way, just came out, I believe. I saw some slides today, unless they were sneaking them out. Came out on September 1st. And so you may want to check on the SAMHSA website. There is a set of slides, I believe, used by Dr. Eleanor Katz related to this new data. So you may want to go to the SAMHSA, and that was SAMHSA, SAMHSA.gov, and search for the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. And there you'll be able to see. They do have data on extensive data on marijuana, on the heroin crisis, et cetera, so you may want to check that webpage.
I do see.
Dr. Baylor, is Monitoring the Future, that comes out in October?
Yeah, we're going to have press conferences and data release. I'm not sure exactly when it comes out, but the press conference is in December, if I'm not mistaken.
In December.
In December, I think is the release. The public release is at the end of the year. Not
Yeah,
exactly.
that's another set of eyes that I think folks ought to, visit NIDA, and it's called Monitoring the Future. And for the first time, I saw some of the methodology data used for NISDA, and they were comparing it to Monitoring the Future to make sure that both align for the first time. I haven't seen that in my 20 years, so it should be interesting. Dolka?
Yvette?
Yes.
I see two questions on here. I don't know if I'm getting questions different about, and Dolka, maybe you see these. What are CBD oils and how are they linked to marijuana? Do you see that one? And then I see another question
we have time for one more questions.
Okay, I see one, and this is, I may be looking at something else that other people may not be, but it says here, should prevention materials, Lisa Harper, to all panelists, should prevention materials be directed at Hispanic youth? And should they be provided in both Spanish and in English?
Well, NIDA has a very robust segment of the website in Spanish. Most of the most important resources are both in English and Spanish, and they are identified that way. So you can find the resources in Spanish in our website at least.
Right, and I agree that they should be both in English and Spanish, and whatever culture you're working with, that information should be translated over. And then, yes, I agree that should be. I see one other question here. Can I read this question? Or
sure.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, it says, for prevention programs that have coalitions in place in the Inland Empire. Now this is in Southern California. How can we begin the conversation to develop marijuana task force with youth and parents that are currently active? And so, Henny, I think this might be a question for you. This is from Mirza with Central Valley Prevention Programs. Henny, how do you tie up all the different organizations, or do you work with different organizations? And after you answer, I'll go ahead and answer as well. But you work with different organizations and help them help tie them up, don't you?
We do. We work a lot with coalitions. We're members of coalitions. We work with other providers that are in the space that don't necessarily focus primarily on just one particular substance versus another. But we are out in our communities talking about this. And we're very,
the temperature outside is 100.
I'm sorry.
It's hot somewhere.
I don't know what happened.
Get closer to the mic so we can outride the announcement.
So we do work. We are out in our communities. Members of my team are in our communities, and we do a lot of work with the media to try to raise awareness about the topic, at the topics at hand, so that we can reach more people in our community. So we do not shy away from the media, but we really try to utilize the opportunities that are presented. We do a lot of letters to the editor. We're on social media. We do television interviews frequently. Again, and that's been a trust building relationship because, again, as I mentioned earlier, since we're not anti or pro legalization, we're dealing with the hands that we've been dealt. We've become a trusted source. So feel free to speak up and let people know your concerns and feel comfortable getting answers from the people that you elect.
Right. And Mirza, directing that question, I'm familiar with the work that you're doing out there.
Yeah, I found
I think one of the things like Henny, you need to have a real strong mission statement so people, when they see you, they can go, oh, I understand what they do. I want to be part of that or be connected to that. So have real clear guidelines as what you're doing in the community. And in light of that, it'll start to attract other groups to you.
I found your CBD question. It says, what are CBD oils and how are they linked to marijuana?
That's for me, I guess, or?
Yes, I would say so.
Well, CBD is a short for cannabidiol. CBD is short for cannabidiol. It's a minor component of the cannabis plant. It's not psychoactive. It interacts, we think, with the same receptor, but it doesn't cause a high. Yet it's still a Schedule I drug. It's part of the marijuana components. So it is a Schedule I drug. It's not psychoactive, but it's believed to have many potential therapeutic indications. The only one that has been approved after years of intensive research is for these forms of rare epileptic forms in pediatric populations. Dravet syndrome, for example, is one type of epilepsy that is sort of refractory to typical treatment in pediatric populations. So that's the one indication developed by a pharmaceutical industry, a company in Great Britain called GW Pharmaceuticals. That's the only CBD indication that we have so far, even though there are thousands out there that you can find myths about CBD use for cancer, from cancer to psychosis to anxiety to everything. So CBD is usually an extraction. What you can find in a dispensary is an extraction, oil extracted from CBD-rich strains of marijuana that are naturally rich in CBD and poorer in THC that can be extracted and purified and concentrated to provide that that need for people who are seeking relief from pain or from psychosis or anxiety that has really is not a non-evidence base at this point.
And there was a question related to its use by the older population, I suspect, as they try to deal with issues like arthritis or rheumatism.
This is all part of the very effective advocacy groups that have been trying to market these CBD oils in different forms that have absolutely no basis in research.
Okay. I lost track of all of you. I cannot see you. All I see is my big face on the screen. So I'm going to ask Dolka to take us through on this and close us out. First, I want to thank our panelists, Dr. Baylor, Henny, and Ray. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I believe that we captured the essence of what's going on and how we can help Hispanic youth and families and parents. So Dolka, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much for Ms. Henny, Dr. Baylor, Mr. Lozano, and Yvette. Thank you so much for this amazing and informative presentation. Our goal and hope are that after this conversation, each of us can advance our prevention work and to be vigilant and proactive in our communities and around the country to stop, reduce the use and misuse and abuse of marijuana. And we can do it. Let's take this as a call to action as a prevention specialist to really advance this fight. So right now, please, next slide, please. As Priscilla help us to put to show the next slide. So I want to thanks again. Next slide, please. This is the presenters contact information, our center, also information. Feel free to contact the speakers and us, especially the Hispanic and Latino project. You need access to training, it's free, and we can offer you the technical assistance. Thank you again for joining the webinar, The Reality of Marijuana and Hispanic Latino Youth Meet, Truth, Consequences, and Options. Now you will be redirected to another page to complete the evaluation. We appreciate your participation. Your opinion is important to us, so take a moment to complete that evaluation. Thank you, gracias, and obrigado.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you all.
Thank you.